Daphne here. Welcome to our DS Leadership Life Facebook Live tonight. We are talking about mindful stories. I know it seems like kind of a weird thing to talk about, right? But how do we work with this thing that goes on in our head, the thoughts that arise, and then the way that we sort of weave them into these fantastical stories. Some that actually can be kind of helpful in some ways, and a majority of them that seem to not be so helpful, that really can be a contributor to some of the suffering that we experience and that we go through in a day. And so I really wanted to talk about this tonight. It's a big topic, but it's one, there are a few little tricks that I've learned that I think are really helpful, that can sort of allow us to see through some of the illusions that we get stuck in and some of the delusion that we get stuck in as well. And you know, one of the things to know is that we really do make up the meaning of things, you know. So if somebody looks at us a certain way, we want to sort of apply the meaning to that, or some words that someone says, you know, we want to apply the meaning to it. And sometimes, sometimes we can be accurate about it, but again, a good majority of the time, we're not. And so how do we work with that, and how can we catch ourselves, right, in the moment? And that's what mindfulness really is. It's sort of that moment of awakening that says, oh, I'm not seeing reality as clearly as I could be, or maybe I am seeing it as clearly as I could be, but you know, maybe I'm in reaction to some part of it. You know, I'm kind of getting stuck in it. So that's what we're really talking about tonight. The first part of this that I want to share with you that I learned, quite some time ago, that was a real game changer for me, was this idea of fact versus story. You know, what was the thing that actually happened, right? What's the event? And this has been talked about in a number of ways. You know, a famous psychologist really came up with the ABC model, and he called, kind of described it as there's an activating event, and then there's the belief, which we could call story. There's the belief that we have about the event, and then the belief can start to really drive the consequences of that event. You know, drives more of the consequences than the event itself. So the meaning that we make up about it, the stories that we tell ourselves, the beliefs that we have about it, starts to make more of a difference in how our reactions and our consequences, what comes out of that event. Other ways to talk about it when it comes to fact versus story is, you know, what's the video camera? What was the thing that actually happened? What would the video camera have recorded? And this is a game changer. You know, once you start to get like, okay, what the video camera would have recorded is, you know, I spent money on the dress, and my significant other got upset, you know, voiced some words, rather, said some words. And the story I made up about it was they were upset, you know? So we can kind of catch our interpretation. So the video camera test is really, you know, what were the words that were spoken? What were the actions? You know, video camera can record behaviors, you know, in terms of actions. It can record facial expression. It can record arms moving, all of those sorts of things, and sound, obviously. And then if we boil it down to that, what was that thing that really happened that the video camera would have recorded? And then what were our interpretations about it? And that's the story. What's the thing that we tell ourselves about this? And how we frame stories in our mind, you know, moment by moment, really can matter and can be a big contributor to some of the suffering we may experience and some of the discomfort that we may experience in life, and also the deeper stories that we tell about ourselves, like I'm not good at such and such, or I could never. These sorts of things can start to become limiting for us. They can limit maybe our possibilities of expansion and transformation. So paying attention to story can be really helpful. And then what do we do? You know, so awareness is the first step. Once we're aware of it, okay, then what, right? And this is one of the tricky parts that I was really excited to talk about tonight, because so often we try to use our mind that got us stuck in the story as the means to get ourselves out of the story, and it doesn't work very well. So there just are some skillful things that we can do that can be really helpful. And one of the most skillful that I've encountered that is helpful for most people, and I'll say more about that in a minute, is really to come back to the body, getting in touch with body sensations, getting in touch with maybe the breath. And there can be times when getting in touch with the body may not feel safe to us. It may not feel comfortable for us. And in that instance, it can be really helpful to even use sound as an anchor for our attention. In other words, we kind of, how I like to think of it is like we switch the channel. You know, we change the channel, not necessarily as just a form of distraction to keep us away from our experience, but more so to bring us in greater touch with our experience, right? So the mind really, as we're making up and we're sort of weaving this entanglement and we're spinning out into fantasy wherever we go in story, it's really keeping us away from our moment by moment experience. As a matter of fact, we keep layering it on. We could add this second arrow, if you will, to our experience. So maybe something the non-preferred, unfavorable did occur for us. Maybe our car, it is true that what the video camera recorded was someone, I came in and the window was broken, all my stuff was removed from my car. So it isn't that we're just making up stories about favorable experiences or making up stories about things that are somewhat neutral. Maybe that thing actually happened, and we have that way of adding that second arrow, the things that we tell ourselves. If I were a better person, the car wouldn't have gotten broken into. If I would have parked in a different spot, or if I'd stopped coming to dangerous neighborhoods, this wouldn't have happened, so on and so forth. It's in some way we start to personalize the event that's occurring. So without adding the second arrow to it, we can get back to what really occurred and what was that initial experience, what was that, and then the moment by moment experience without layering on the story. So coming back to the body can be really helpful to work with that, getting in touch with body sensation, moment by moment body sensation, and sort of staying out of the business of the mind, the busyness of the mind, if you will. And if that doesn't feel comfortable, coming back to the breath can be a really good idea. Not to try to just, grip our attention there, but just noticing the breath, one breath as it comes and it goes, and noticing what happens with the breath. And we can even use sound, noticing sound. Can be really helpful as an anchor, just to allow us to get in touch with our moment by moment experience, and then letting the mind just have a second of its own accord. What's really interesting about that process, if you give it a shot, and by the way, I recommend working with things that maybe not have so much energy around them. If you're going to start practicing in a way, or if you haven't practiced in this way, not working with the big stuff of our life, right? Not working with the really tender parts of our lives, or the places where maybe something really traumatic has happened, and we do have a lot of stories about what that means about us. Maybe not starting with that stuff. Start with the easier stuff first. It's always a little bit more friendly to do that. And then working with ourselves in that way, and just noticing sensations as they arise, noticing what the body is doing, and that really can help us get in touch with our experience, and then move us through getting better access to to our cognition, getting access to the wise parts of our cognition and our thoughts, so that if there's an action to be taken, we really are making it with sort of a full body experience. It's not just the head trying to get itself out of something, or trying to control something, or trying to keep something away from us, or keep something close to us. We really get to access our deep wisdom. And what I found in working with people is that's really what people want. They want access to that deeper part of their wisdom, that sort of part of us, that transformative part of us that kind of has this knowing about what to do, or this sense, if there is something to be done, that it comes from a place of wisdom. I kind of think of wisdom as my heart and my head being connected, talking to each other in a sense. So we get into that deeper part and deeper parts of ourselves, so that even if something non-preferred happens to us, or something that really was traumatic, or brings up a lot of emotion for us, or a lot of sensation for us, we can learn to be with it in a way that's really helpful, that really allows us to access those parts of us, deeper parts of ourselves, the wise part of ourselves. And when we're not stuck in story, we can do that. Now, it often, by the way, can be helpful to have a really trusted person in your life, a trusted friend, who can be with you to process through some of this and not get caught up in your story. So a lot of times people are like, I want to talk to my friend. And sometimes our friends, people around us get caught up in the story, and they want to tell us how right we are, and things are horrible, and you should quit your job, your boss is an idiot, those sorts of things. And sometimes that's not always helpful. So if we can have a trusted friend and a trusted ally that can help us process through story, that can be really good, and get us back to our body, get us back to the things that get us back to our body sensation, and help us guide ourselves through that. And then we can get in touch with what's really at the root of things. So I wanted to say that about mindful stories a little bit. There's a couple more things that I want to say about that. And another way that I like to approach story is also, when we catch ourselves telling a story that isn't really helpful, we can question it, and we can ask ourselves, really, is that true? Is absolutely true? And there's a beautiful body of work from Byron Katie, who I highly recommend that you look up, who's done, and she calls it The Work, and she has these 4 questions that she asks that really helps us to inquire. What it really is allowing us to look at the mind, to look at how it really constructs story, and going through a process to ask ourselves is it's true. And I think once we're in touch with the body, especially also, that it adds a whole nother level to her work and can get us really sort of seeing like, oh, all the things that I'm telling myself really aren't true. And remember that to be in story, we're pulling from the past and we're off in the future. So neither of which are grounded in the now, right? It's true that we might be having the story, but it's actually not grounded in the now. And so when we spin out too much into the future, we experience a lot of anxiety. When we spend a lot of time in the past, often what we start to experience are greater and greater levels of regret. So we can do this work, we can question our thoughts then in a really mindful way. Once we're aware that we're in story, we can start to question these thoughts and we can really be with them. We can be with them in a way like, oh, I don't have to be in reaction to these. I don't have to become identified with the stories and with what I'm telling myself. So give those few practices a shot. There's others that we could talk about for sure, but I'd like to just leave you with those practices tonight and see what comes up for you as you start to tiptoe your way into these practices if you haven't done them before, and also how you work with story. And then lastly, what I want to leave you with is reframing our story can be really powerful. And it isn't to say that we're grateful for horrible events that have happened to us. That's sort of crazy making. We can take them, and actually this comes from a really lovely teacher who I like a lot, who said, it's not that we need to be grateful for our events, but we can kind of accept them as a given, right? So maybe not grateful, but a given. That non-favorable things, non-preferred things will happen to us. There will be some, pain and pleasure and blame and praise in our life, for sure. These are sort of the vicissitudes of life. And so when we start to recognize those, we can be with those in a certain way. So it isn't that we have to be grateful for them, but we can accept them as a given. And how we choose to tell the story really matters. It isn't that we have to leave reality, but we can start to pay attention to when we're adding the second arrow into the story that really creates more of our suffering and keeps us away from ourselves, from our heartfelt parts of ourselves and our deeper wisdom. So I will leave you with that. Thanks for being with me tonight. It was super great and super awesome. And I look forward to being with you at our next Mindfulness Live session. See you soon.